Hello, I'm James Willerton, and this is a video of a resilience case study which I wanted to share. The reason I wanted to do this was to basically signpost a few reading resources which you may find helpful, and at the end I'll just thought of a few little questions to pose, which is where tutors are happiest posing leadership questions. So I hope you enjoy it. The guy I want to use for this case study is a chap called James Stockdale. He was the most senior US naval officer shot down in the Vietnam War. And he went from the command of 1,000 men, stellar career, everything at his feet pretty much, through a couple of minutes of peace and silence under the canopy of a parachute into a completely different world where he was an object of hatred. He was beaten very seriously on landing by the local villagers that found him, leg badly broken. He had a limp the rest of his life from the back of that. And then captured by police, taken to the Hanoi Hilton prisoner of war camp, as they called it. And 7.5 years in as a prisoner of war then. And quite a remarkable turnaround for him, and I'm interested in how he dealt with that. I want to say that this isn't a hero worship piece by any means. There's a lot of American influence generally in leadership and business literature, and this case could be looked at as being a bit stereotypical in some ways, and I get that. But there are things I think that are interesting from it nevertheless, and I'll maybe try and think of some other kind of sources of inspiration for these videos in the future as well to keep it diverse. So, whilst inside, in the most extreme of circumstances, he was tortured 15 times, very seriously. He still took his leadership responsibilities very, very seriously while he was in there. So he insisted that there was still military discipline, there was still military hierarchy in place within the prison amongst the Americans that were there. And he instilled a code of conduct within the other Americans there. They communicated through, tapping messages, or through, this is pretty grim, they used to get rat poo, lick it, and then write on whatever they could find to make messages on and pass that between themselves on the drop-off point in the exercise yards. I'd like somebody a lot to communicate them in that way. And generally just keep morale, keep hope going, keep some structure going. They'd even allocate torture at certain times. So lots going on there actually within this time in there, and he never shirked those responsibilities, I don't think. And even before that time as well, he was this type of leader who would fly the most dangerous aeroplane, either test flights, or they knew that one of the aircraft types they operated was more likely to get shot down over Vietnam, and he would fly that plane on mission to show that, if that's what they had available, he wasn't too big to get in the high risk category himself if he expected other people to do the same. When he came out, he ran for US Vice President in '92. So although not a politician, he did become a quite famous figure within the States, and an interesting life. These are a couple of books that he wrote: Courage Under Fire and A Vietnam Experience, if you'd like to read more about the chap. He does write beautifully, so they're quite well structured and interesting reads, and it will give you a bit of background more on his philosophy and how he kind of came to be and do the things that he did. In Jim Collins's book, Good to Great, Jim interviewed James Stockdale, and they eventually came up with the Stockdale paradox, which is a quote from Stockdale. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. And this is his interpretation of his idea of optimistic realism. So not blind optimism and not pessimism or fatalism, but this idea of deterministic, optimistic realism. And here's some questions. So number one of the themes that I brought from my reading was again the idea of fear and leaders' relationship with fear. And Stockdale says that the avoidance of failure isn't success in itself. And that's quite an interesting point to consider, I think, in tough times. Actually, reaching for something excellent or reaching for something good carries a risk very often and a consequence. I had a business from 2001 which went under in the recession of 07, 08, and it was very painful. It was an extremely tough year when the business was struggling, and then it probably took me 10 years to recover the position off the back of that as well. And consequence for me was lost marriage, lost house, lost business, lost status, lost money, that a fair amount. But looking back now in the round, I wouldn't have swapped that experience, because I think that it's informed who I am today, who I try to be today. And the yachts would have been nice by now, don't get me wrong, but actually, as a life experience, I wouldn't have swapped anything. I wouldn't have gone back and not taken those risks, because the consequence was significant for me. Sometimes you get caught, standing when the music stops with no chair to sit on, and life's not always fair, and it certainly taught me that. Perspective is another thing I want to talk about then. So, what is your brutal reality? What's the worst that could happen for you? How bad really is that? Stockdale would say, well, if death was the worst thing that could happen, that's not so bad, I can cope. That's an extreme case. Yours may be different from that. But are you reconciled to put things into perspective, and a real perspective? If you can you find a way to reach better perspective? Things like coaching may help with that, for example. The connection thing now, and this is around, are you connected with the people around you that matter? And that's two ways. Can you reach out for help and communicate to us when you need to do? And can you receive it as well? And if you read Stockdale's accounts, you'll see this very strong theme of connectedness between the Americans that were in prison together, and the bonding experience that I had with them, and the things they put themselves through for each other in extraordinary times. Simon Sinek, Start With Why. I haven't signposted that book, so I thought 4 was enough for today, but true purpose, faith, or philosophy. Without that deep well of the thing that's bigger than us, it can be very difficult to strive consistently through difficult times, to walk the broken glass. And I think the people who tend to show the most resilience and the most extraordinary feats, I guess, are the ones that really plug in strongly to an identity that really matters to them. The thing that's massively important to them beyond their own selfish needs, if that makes sense. So there's a piece there around the bigger picture thing. Code, then, the values that you have which guide your decision making. As leaders, when we make decisions when things are difficult and obtuse and obfuscated, we don't know if we're going to be right or wrong or in the middle yet. Probably in the middle, but we just don't know that yet. But what we can do is sense check those decisions against our own value system, if we know what it is. Do we take full control over the things that we have got control over, and can we let go of the rest? There are 2 lists there, and we can spend a lot of time ruminating and railing at the unfairness of things, that's the external things that impact upon us, when we should perhaps be dealing with the stuff that is in our grasp, which is enough to keep us more than occupied. If you'd like another book for this one, that's Paul McGee's Sumo, Shut Up and Move On, which helps those of you that travel through your fish tanks of life with a trail of those long poos that fish get, of ruminations and wrongs that have happened in the past. That book might help you snip it off and move on. And finally, then, the kind of rituals and habits that can help us. So Stockdale did 400 press-ups a day. When my business failed, one of the things I did was go to the gym. So it was a place, it was my temple I could go to, where all things were equal again, and I could get rid of the frustration. I could do something positive and empowering, build my physical strength up again. And I think, whatever that looks like for you, whether it's physical, whether it's intellectual, whether it's your emotional well-being, having habits which support one or all of those things in times of difficulty is even more important than in plain sailing. Do you have yours? That's it for this video. I hope you found something useful in that, and more importantly, I hope everybody is healthy. And hopefully we'll see you soon. Thanks very much.